show we are returning to the case of State versus Eric Boyd in case 112657.
Yeah, I just want to put on the record that this morning, before court started, I was out in the hall and saw somebody that I recognized, and I waved and smiled, and about that time realized that was a juror, and so then I dropped my head. So I did not talk to her, but I just want to put that on the record that I did wave and smile at a juror.
And for putting things on the record, I do want to put on the record that yesterday I got on the elevator with one of the jurors, didn't realize who they were, and asked them which floor. And when we got off on the first floor, I said, "After you." So
I think we survived that.
I just wanted to make sure we're both on the record.
All right. All right. I think we're about to take.
Yes, sir.
Stay ready for the jury.
Do we want him out first? Do we want Mr. Thomas to be on the witness stand before the jury gets here?
However, security wants to handle it. You want to bring them in here? All right. We're going to do that.
Oh, also, on the record, yesterday I had identified Mr. Thomas's wallet as Exhibit 129. We've already used Exhibit 129, so I would move to change that to Exhibit 445. And so Exhibit 445 will be a picture of the wallet, pens, cigarette lighter, coins, bliss stick, and ID that Mr. Thomas identified as his.
Any objection?
No objection to that. There's the diagram of the house.
Bring the jury. You can be seated. Stay where you talk.
Yes.
Stay where you talk.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll ask you again, if anyone, from the time you left the jury room, from the time you left the courtroom yesterday until this moment, if anyone has tried to engage you in conversation about this case and talk to you about it, please raise your hand. No one is raising a hand. If any information of any kind has been sent to you or distributed to you that purports to talk or give information about this case, if that has happened, please raise your hand. No one's raising a hand. All right. All right, Mr. Frazier, you can proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. (2316) Chipman Street. Show you the diagram, I believe. Are you familiar with the layout of this house? Correct. See it like this. All right, so just so I'm clear and understand, this bedroom right here, which says north bedroom, correct? This the front room?
Correct.
Okay. This is Mr. Davidson's bedroom, correct?
Correct.
This south bedroom, right up here, this is Mr. Cobbins, where he is staying with Ms. Coleman. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And you're in here in the living room, right here. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, this is a small home. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
And it would be rather easy if you were in, say, the living room to hear if something was going on in the bedroom, the front bedroom, correct?
I mean, like if the TV and the radio is not on, yes.
Yeah, but it would be easy to hear something. And let me just make sure I understand this. While you were present, Chris Newsom was here on this sun porch.
Correct.
He wasn't raped on the sun porch.
Not that I know of.
Not that you saw.
Correct.
All right? Shannon wasn't raped on this front porch.
No.
Not that you saw. She was taken into this front bedroom,
Correct.
and you don't know what happened in there.
No, I wasn't in there.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about Latalvius Cobbins. I believe you testified yesterday that you met him in 2005, 2006, sometime like that. Is that right?
Correct.
Y'all met in Memphis?
Yes.
And when you met, how long did you all stay in Memphis where you got acquainted?
About 8 months, 9 months, something like that.
Okay, so you lived in Memphis for 8 or 9 months?
No, I lived in Memphis since 2003.
Okay, so you were living in Memphis.
Correct.
Latalvius Cobbins was living in Memphis.
Well, I don't know if he was living in Memphis during 2003. I didn't meet him.
I understand that. I'm talking about 2005, 2006 when you met him.
Correct.
During that period of time, he was living in Memphis.
Correct.
And y'all would, stay in touch with each other?
Yes.
Y'all would spend time together?
Yes.
Y'all would smoke blunts together?
Correct.
Y'all, did you live together during that time period?
No.
Did you ever stay over at his house?
No.
Did he ever stay over at your house?
No.
Now, at some point in time, though, y'all did travel together, correct?
Correct.
And y'all left Memphis, is that right?
Yes.
Went to Kentucky?
Correct.
All right. Why'd you go to Kentucky?
I was working at Amazon.com.
Okay, so you got a job at Amazon in Kentucky,
Correct.
and Latalvius Cobbins, he followed you to Kentucky, is that right?
He didn't follow me. He went as well.
He moved as well. Did y'all live together in Kentucky?
We didn't live. We wasn't living up there at the time. We was working for a labor company that was out of Memphis that was supplying workers to Amazon.com.
Okay. All right, so you're working a job out of Memphis that sent y'all to Kentucky.
Correct.
All right. And so again, were y'all living together or you had separate residences?
We were staying. The company had set us up in hotels.
Okay, so you were staying in hotels.
Correct.
All right, but at the same time, you still spent time together, correct?
Yeah, when we wasn't working, yes.
Yeah. And y'all smoked blunts together.
Correct.
All right. And again, would you call him your best friend?
At the point in time, yeah.
Yeah, so that was your best friend. Just to be clear, you told this jury yesterday that you didn't see Latalvius Cobbins injure anyone the night in question.
You said do what?
You didn't see him hurt anybody.
No, I did not.
You didn't see him rape anybody.
No, I did not.
You did say that you saw him go into the front bedroom for a minute, but not for very long, right? That's your testimony yesterday?
That he went into the front bedroom, correct?
And when you got apprehended in Kentucky, you were taken into for questioning by the police. First person they talked to was Latalvius Cobbins, correct?
I believe so. I wasn't
You don't know.
in the area.
Okay. Then you were brought in. Police talked to you and they asked you, did they show up in a SUV, a white colored SUV? And then, just tell us how. Tell us how. Start with Saturday afternoon. Who went and did what? And your answer to them during this interview was Saturday afternoon, Slim left out, as a matter of fact. He was gone for a good long minute. He was gone. You remember saying that?
Correct.
Then detectives asked you, do you remember a short, bald-headed, light-skinned black dude showing up over there, and he was in his own car? I think your response was, a short? They called him E. And you said, okay, yeah, I remember seeing him. Okay, you remember saying that?
Yes.
Then they asked you, do you remember a point in time where Slim and E and Rome all left together in Slim's car and E's car and you stayed there, you and Vanessa, Saturday night? And then another detective said, Saturday evening. And you said, yeah, I believe so, right?
Correct.
That's what you said. And then they say, okay, all right, at some point in time, a white SUV came back with Slim and E, and Rome was driving E's car. Do you remember that? You came out the front little sunroom porch, remember that? And you said, yeah. You remember saying that? You agreeing with that?
I don't recall saying yes to that specific question, because if you would have heard that they said another question before that question, after that question, and I said yes.
Can I approach?
Sir?
You'll review this. This is a copy of the transcript of your interview from up in Kentucky.
Correct.
This is the section I just read to you.
Correct.
All right? And your response to that question was yeah.
But like I said, if you heard
The next, you want to talk about the next question you were asked. All right. The next question you were asked, okay, do you remember when E and Slim got out of the car and a white guy and a white girl with them, and they had blindfolds over their eyes and their hands were tied? And you said, yeah, I remember seeing them.
correct.
So again, a lot of these details in your statement and in what you testified to yesterday, this is what the police were telling you, correct?
No, well, they didn't tell me that.
Well,
They
they're
asked
the
a
ones that are
question.
saying this, and you're agreeing with what they're saying, right?
They just asked a question, and I gave them the answer.
Yeah, you said, yeah, you agreed with their question. And again, they talked to you after they talked to Latalis. Now, you didn't know Eric Boyd, right? I mean, you just met him that Thursday,
Correct.
all right? So prior to that Thursday, you didn't know him, you didn't run with him.
No, I did not.
And after all this went down, Eric Boyd, he didn't run from the jurisdiction,
I have no idea.
but you and Latalis did.
Run or go back to Kentucky?
You left Knoxville. and
Yes,
went to
correct.
Kentucky. One thing, again, you don't know Eric Boyd, but you do know about guns. Is that right? That's what you said yesterday, you know about guns.
I know what a gun is, and I know what certain guns look like.
Mm-hmm. And Eric Boyd, on the night that this happened, he had an automatic 22.
He had a gun.
You said it was an
I
automatic.
seen him with an automatic 22 at one point in time, but I can't tell you that he had a specific gun.
And again, when you talked to those detectives back in 2007, you told them it was a revolver. Mr. Thomas, isn't it true?
Well, I guess I'm going to object. I think you didn't answer the thing. If you could state that more clearly as a question rather than a statement.
I guess I will believe if I look at, yes. Page 24. And this would be when the detectives are asking you about the gun that you had seen E with. It'd be about section 26, line 26. Your response was, I think it was a revolver.
Okay, I'm pretty sure I did say that.
So
That I
back in
think,
2007,
I
you
didn't-
said you thought it was a revolver.
That I think it was. I didn't say that it was a revolver. I said I think it was.
I think it was. Mr. Thomas, isn't it true that you and Latalis Cobbs decided to blame Eric Boyd for the crimes that you committed?
No.
You didn't plan that when you got back to Kentucky?
No, we did not.
You blamed Eric Boyd, right? You're blaming
I didn't blame him.
Latalis Cobbs was blaming.
I don't know if he blamed him or told him who was with him.
Yeah, Vanessa Coleman didn't blame him.
For all I know, she wasn't there with them when it all had transpired.
And LaMarcus Davidson didn't blame him.
And like I said, I wasn't there with them when it transpired, so
Mr. Thomas, you didn't care what happened to Eric Boyd back in 2007 or today. Just, I said, you didn't care what happened to Eric Boyd.
oh, you asked me, did I care what happened to him?
I'm saying you didn't care, did you?
I didn't know him, so
You didn't know. Okay. Just like you didn't care what happened to Channon Christian.
I don't see how those two would relate to say that I didn't care about them. I mean, I didn't know them either.
Yeah. Just like when you said, fuck that white girl, she didn't mean anything to me. You
No.
said that, didn't you?
I didn't say that specifically like that. That statement was taken out of context by Detective Norman.
Okay, so the detective took that statement out of context. So again, when all this went back down in 2007 and you were charged, the state of Tennessee went for the death penalty, right? Against
Correct.
you. And you got life without parole.
Correct.
And they went after you a second time in a retrial, right?
Correct.
And you came out of that with 2 consecutive life sentences, right?
Correct.
Plus 25 years.
Correct.
And now they're offering you 50 years.
Correct.
And you've done served more than 10 of that.
Correct.
So you've basically gone from spending the rest of your life in prison to one day you're going to get out. Potentially.
Possibly.
Possibly. All right, again, testified yesterday that Chris Newsom wasn't taken off by Eric Boyd and LaMarcus Davison, which is at least one of the statements that you made in Kentucky, right?
Correct.
I think you also said in Kentucky that Eric Boyd took Mr. Newsom off by himself, correct?
Correct.
Yesterday you testified that in fact you and Eric Boyd took Mr. Newsom off.
Correct.
And I believe you testified yesterday that Chris Newsom didn't have anything in his mouth.
I said I didn't know if he did or not.
Be the kind of thing you would notice, don't you think?
I mean, I wasn't looking at him just.
You weren't looking at him. And I believe you also said that, as far as you know, LaMarcus Davidson and Talvis Cobbins didn't rape Channon Christian in the front bedroom. While you were there, you didn't hear anything.
No, I did not.
But that LaMarcus Davidson and Eric Boyd went into the bedroom with Channon Christian.
Correct.
You remember talking to Investigator Childress in January of 2018?
Yeah.
That was last year. And at that point in time, you told him that you don't remember seeing Eric Boyd go into that front bedroom.
Possibly.
You also testified yesterday that Eric Boyd parked across the street from the Chipman Street house, right?
Correct.
Previously, not believe that he didn't park. Let me just say that he didn't park in front of the house, right?
The car that the white Pontiac was not parked in front of the house. It was parked across the street.
Not parked in front of the house. And then you testified yesterday that LaMarcus Davidson drives you, Vanessa Coleman, Latalvius Cobbins to Vincent's house, right?
Correct.
Leaving Eric Boyd behind at the house on Chipman Street with Channon.
Correct.
And again, in 2018, when you talked to Detective Childress in the law library, you told him that you had never seen Eric Boyd with Channon.
Never seen him. I mean, I never seen him alone with her. I mean, I wasn't at the house when we left.
You also didn't see any bags taken out of her SUV, right?
Correct.
You didn't hear any noise from Channon being raped.
No, I did not.
And LaTalvis was with you while you were there at the house when you left, right?
Yes.
Mr. Cobbins left with you.
We all left.
Which means, Mr. Thomas, that you had to be there when Channon was raped. I believe you also said that you didn't tell the authorities back in 2007 about what you testified here yesterday that you witnessed because you didn't want to get drug into all this.
Correct.
Mr. Thomas, we've already talked about how small 2316 Chipman Street is, right?
Correct.
The very beginning of this. Channon Christian is brutally raped and murdered within feet of you. You didn't hear anything?
No, I didn't. Like I said, I did not hear nor see her being raped.
You didn't hear her sodomized.
I just told you I didn't.
You didn't hear when her lip was torn and she was orally raped.
I'm sorry. Do you want me to keep
You
on asking the same
didn't
question?
hear you didn't hear when her lip was torn when she was orally raped.
I already said that I did not hear nor see her being raped.
By your best friend, LaTalvis Cobbins. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Chris Newsom. Your testimony yesterday was that Marcus Davidson told you to go with Eric Boyd and that you went with him and took Chris off.
Correct.
You don't stay on the couch like what you previously told the police. You go with Mr. Boyd, right?
Correct.
You get in the white SUV,
Correct.
Shannon's car.
Correct.
He's driving, Mr. Boyd's driving.
Correct.
Y'all go to the loading dock, right? Drive off to the loading dock?
Yes.
All right. You refuse to get out of the SUV, right?
Correct.
Eric Boyd takes Mr. Newsom over to some bushes?
Yes, correct.
That's right. At that point in time, Mr. Newsom's legs aren't bound.
Not that I know of.
Not that you see. You sit back at the car, right?
Correct.
You hear 3 shots.
I seen
Three
the
shots, that's
yes.
right. All right, you see 3 shots. Then you see Mr. Boyd pulling the body over towards the tracks, right?
Correct.
Mr. Boyd comes back. Is that right?
Correct.
Somewhere, somehow, comes up with a gas can that you hadn't seen up to then, right?
Like I said, it was inside the back seat. I didn't look into the
I
back
believe you
seat.
said you weren't sure where it
Could you
was.
please move closer to the microphone? Some people are having trouble hearing.
At least you said you weren't sure if it was in the back seat. You don't know where it came from, this gas can.
Correct.
Huh? Mr. Thomas, you were present during your first 2 trials, right? During your 2 trials?
Yes, I was.
You heard Dr. Malushnik testify, right?
Correct.
You know that Chris was raped a couple of hours before he was murdered.
I mean, that's what she said, yes.
Mr. Thomas, don't you know the families and us know how Chris and Shannon died?
Correct.
I believe what they were wanting to know was the circumstances of how they died. And I guess just one more thing before I go, Mr. Thomas. You understand that your deal with the state called for truthful testimony?
And that's what I have given.
We're just going to have to be something for the jury to decide after they hear the rest of the state's proof in this case, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the statement that you gave in Kentucky. You've had a chance to listen to your recorded statement.
Yes, I have.
Ask you about. I don't even know if you need the transcript, but did you tell, when you talked to detectives up in Kentucky, did you tell them what you observed whenever Mr. Davidson, Mr. Boyd, and Mr. Coppins returned?
Yes.
What did you tell them? You can pull the microphone down. What did you tell the detectives you observed when they returned?
I told them that when they came into the house, that Cobbins had came to me and he was telling me like, come on, it's time to go. And I'm asking him what's going on. And then that's when Miss Christian walked in and Mr. Davidson was behind her and walked her into the front bedroom.
And who came in next?
And then Mr. Newsom was inside the sunroom and Mr. Boyd was right there as well.
And that's what you told them?
Yes.
Now, what did you and Mr. Coppins, did the two of you get together and decide what you were going to tell the detectives before you were arrested?
No, we did not.
What was your mindset when you went into the interview? What were you planning on doing?
I was just planning on telling them, I mean, as much as I can without trying to incriminate myself and pull myself into what all had happened.
Why was that?
Because, I mean, I didn't do anything to warrant me being arrested and charged with something that I didn't do.
Also, did you tell the detectives, did they ask you why couldn't you leave?
Yes, they asked me,
And what did you tell them?
and I told them they wouldn't let me leave.
And who did you tell them wouldn't let you leave?
That Mr. Boyd and Mr. Davidson would not let me leave.
And who did you tell them left in the car together? Whenever involving Mr. Newsom?
Well, I told them that Mr. Boyd and Mr. Newsom had left.
And who did you tell them came back?
Mr. Boyd.
Now, do you know what time the carjacking happened?
No, I do not.
Do you know what, if any, crimes Mr. Boyd or Mr. Davidson or Mr. Coppins committed against Channon and Chris before they got to the house?
No, I do not.
Do you know if they were raped before they got to the house?
No, I do not.
Do you know what crimes Mr. Boyd committed against Mr. Newsom there at the train tracks before he shot him? As
No.
far as whether or not he raped him again?
I mean, no, because it was off into a stand of trees that were behind the building, but across from the drainage ditch.
And you had told us about the bindings. Remind us again about the bindings that Mr. Newsom had on his arms or his hands.
Well, I know he had something that was tying his hands behind his back, and he had something over his face. I mean, it wasn't a bandana, but it was something else.
And the bindings, where did those bindings come from for his hands?
There was some from the floral pattern drapes or sheets that Miss Freeman had given him.
Now, back at the house, did you see Mr. Cobbins rape Miss Christian?
No, I did not.
Based upon the evidence from the trial, you know that he did?
Yes.
Did you see Mr. Davidson rape Miss Newsom?
No, I did.
Miss Christian?
No, I did not.
Based upon the evidence from the trial, you know that he did?
Yes.
And did you see Mr. Boyd rape Miss Christian?
No, I did not.
You don't know what took place in that room?
No.
Was Mr. Cobbins with you the entire time?
No, he was not.
Thank you.
Can you recross? No, Your Honor. You can. The deputy just interrupted.
Jody Long.
Who is this, Joe?
Jody Long.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give in the hearing of this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Please have a seat.
Give us your name, please, ma'am.
Jody Long,
How do you spell your first name?
Jody.
Long, you live here in Knoxville.
I do.
Back in 2007, did you live here in Knoxville?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Back in 2007, did you know a fellow by the name of Vincent Wernemont?
Yes, sir.
How'd you know him?
He was somebody that I got drugs from.
In January of 2007, were you acquainted with him during that month of 2007?
Yes, sir.
And how were you introduced to him, if you recall?
He was a friend of mine's godson.
In the early part of January 2007, did Mr. Wernemont ask you to do something?
He did.
What did he ask you to do?
To give some friends of his a ride to Kentucky.
And where were you when you got this request?
I was at home, at my mother's house.
And where's your mother live?
Oh, it's 6906 Seaver Drive.
And what's her name?
Wanda Long.
Okay. And when you got that request, what did you do?
I got up and got dressed and went over to Vince's house.
And where was Vince's house? Do you remember?
Whittle Springs.
Willow Springs area?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you do then when you got there?
I got myself fixed and got, I followed him to the gas station, and we went from the gas station over to someone's house to pick his friends up.
And you recall which house that you went to, or whose house it was?
I know whose house it was, but I don't know where it
Whose
was at.
house?
It was Susan Hill's house.
If I may approach.
Yes.
Show you a photograph in Mark Exhibit 299. You recognize that photograph?
Mhm.
And who is that?
That's Susan Hill.
And who was at Susan Hill's house?
The three individuals that I was supposed to take to Kentucky
And whose request?
at Vince's request.
And did you know these individuals?
No, sir.
And how many, so there were three individuals,
Hmm.
males, females,
2 males and a female.
black, white,
Black.
all three?
All three black.
And when you got to Miss Hill's house, did you begin to take these individuals toward Kentucky?
I did. We picked them up. They loaded the car up with their stuff, and we headed out to Kentucky.
And you did not know these people?
No, sir.
You say you got, somebody took you, got some gas?
Vince put
Vince
gas in
did
my
put
car.
gas in your car.
Uh-huh.
What were you to receive for taking these folks to
A
Kentucky?
couple of morphine pills, some crack, and so a little bit of cash.
Now, on the way to Kentucky, did you know where in Kentucky you were going?
No, I just followed the directions that the gentleman in the back gave me.
And the passengers that you had, where were they seated in your car?
I had Vanessa in the front, and the guys were in the back.
You say Vanessa, is that who you now know to be Vanessa
Vanessa,
Coleman?
yes.
And the two black gentlemen in the back of the car, is that correct?
Hmm.
About how long did it take you to drive to Kentucky?
About 4.5 hours.
Was there conversation during that ride to Kentucky?
A lot of it from me, but no, not really. The guys kind of talked amongst themselves in the back. I couldn't hear them; they're very low, and of course she was in the front and she didn't have a lot to say.
And when you got to Kentucky, do you remember what town you went to?
No, sir. I don't remember anything other than him telling me where to go.
And did you go to where he told you to go?
Hmm.
And what'd you do when you got there?
We got into a little town and we went to the Wendy's We had stopped before and got gas in between and got some drinks and snacks and stuff. And then when we got into Kentucky, we stopped at the Wendy's and went through the drive-through. And then he directed me on to the house that I dropped them at.
And you remember the color of the house?
It was a little white house.
And when you got to that house, what happened?
They got out, I unloaded the trunk, or I helped them. I was putting stuff on the porch as they were carrying it in, and I went back to Knoxville.
Did you have any conversation with any of those folks about what they were doing in Knoxville, why they were in Knoxville,
No, sir.
what they did in Knoxville?
No, sir.
Now, you say you dropped them off?
Hmm.
Did you return to Knoxville?
I did.
Same day?
Same day. That very evening, I was back by, I think it was 10 or 11, because the news was on.
After you got back, a day or two later, did you see anything on the news that caused you some concern?
That night,
That
I saw
night?
something on the news that caused me some concern.
And what was that?
They were looking for those individuals that I had just dropped off.
Did you see their pictures?
Yeah, I think, I'm really not 100% sure on the pictures, but I'm sure there were some mug shots up there, but I don't really remember 100%.
And once you saw that, what did you do, if anything?
Oh, I was mad. I told Vince that, how dare you put me in a situation like this, and I was, already out of my mind anyways, and I just kind of freaked out, went home.
And at some point, did you talk to law enforcement about what you had done?
When I was on probation for some other charges, and they came to CAP and talked to me.
And before we put that picture back in, if you could just write on the back, Susan, that you identified in that. Susan Hill, is that her name? If you would care to write that on there.
Susan Hill?
Yeah, just underneath that sticker would be fine. That's what.
Cross-examination.
And just one question. I know you referenced you were on CAP. That's the Community Alternatives to Prison program, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's all.
No further questions, you can stay there.
Okay, you can step down.
Thanks.
Ms. Freeman? For the record, we'd like to move into evidence 299.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Let it be received.
Maybe you're just gonna go right up there. Yes, ma'am. Just right up there next to the judge.
solemnly swear that the evidence you're about to give in the hearing of this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please have a seat.
It's gonna be real quick. You wanna scoot up a little bit closer. Now, you do not wanna be here.
I do not.
You're only here because you've been personally served with a subpoena.
Right.
If I can direct your attention back to January 2007, at the time, did you know a person by the name of LaMarcus Davidson, better nicknamed Slim?
Yes.
Had you sold him some furniture?
Furniture, some bedspreads, curtains, things of that nature.
Did he owe you some money?
He did.
And were you expecting him to pay you that money?
I was.
Do you recall why you needed that money?
Oh yeah, I needed to pay my KUB bill.
And do you recall where you were living at the time?
Yes, I was living, well, I moved from Chahawi Street until Washington Ridge Apartments.
Now, whenever you moved from Chahawi to Washington Ridge, did you have like a lot of furniture or something you had to move?
Yes, I had a house full of furniture.
Who helped you to move, if you recall?
It was Slim and Daphne and George and Romeo.
Is Romeo, do you know him as Latalis Collins? You may not.
I just know it was Slim's brother.
Slim's brother. And so when you say Rome, is this Rome here?
Yes.
And for the record, that's going to be Exhibit 292.
Okay.
Okay. And so when they helped you to move, what the furniture that you sold Mr. Davidson, did you sell that to him before they helped you to move?
Yes.
And the do you recall what bedding it was that you gave to Mr. Davidson or sold to Mr. Davidson?
Bedspread and curtains.
I can approach and show you Exhibit 404. Do you recognize this pattern?
Yes.
And what do you recognize this pattern to be?
A curtain.
Was it? Did you give this to Mr. Davidson?
Mm-hmm. The pillow shams.
So it was a complete.
Yeah, it was a complete set.
All right. So you were. For the record, we're going to seek to move into evidence Exhibit 404.
No objection.
Collection.
Let it be received.
So you said you were expecting Mr. Davidson to pay for your money.
Yes.
Did he ever show up that night?
No, he did not show up that night.
If you were to look at a aerial map of Washington Ridge Apartments, would you be able to point out approximately where your apartment was?
I can try.
Okay. And if you can't, that's okay. All right, I'm trying to orient you here. I'm looking here at exhibit, is that 428 at the top? And if this is Washington Pike here, and if this
Washington Ridge.
Washington Ridge, and if all of this is the complex.
Okay, well, if he went up this way.
What I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna turn it around so the jury can see, okay?
Okay.
So if this is Washington Ridge here, I'm sorry, if this is Washington Pike,
You enter the apartments right here. Go to there, up to there, around this way, and I live somewhere up in there.
up in there,
Yeah.
and you see that black marker there?
Yes.
Can you mark that, please?
What?
Just,
do-
yeah, the path, yes ma'am.
Somewhere up in there.
the record, we'd like to move into evidence exhibit 428.
No objection. Let it be received.
And so you said that he never came that night.
No, ma'am.
That's what it's.
You pass the witness. Cross-examine.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Miss Jones, you were familiar with Slim and his brother Romeo and George, correct?
Yes,
George went by G.
yes,
And I know that Saturday, Slim was supposed to come by and pay you some money, correct?
correct.
And he never did show up.
No,
Didn't you try to contact him on the phone
I
early
did.
Sunday morning?
I contacted him also, well, I guess it was early Sunday morning. It was Saturday when I went to sleep.
Mhm.
When I woke up, I tried to contact him. It was like 4 in the morning or
4 in the
something like
morning.
that.
Yes, ma'am, something like that. So you tried to contact him early. And at some point in time, you actually went over to Chipman Street later on Sunday, correct?
I did,
And you, in fact, saw G walking, did you not?
I did.
Where'd you see G?
Well, Rhonda had called me down to her house to pick up some furniture, and I was sitting in my car, not furniture, some plates. My grandma's china.
Okay.
And so I was sitting in my car, and G walked past, and I thought it was Slim, but it was not, because he had a hoodie on, and I didn't recognize him really until he walked past.
And which direction was he heading?
He was heading down the street on Chipman toward the railroad tracks
Okay. And that was on Sunday morning?
Sunday morning.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. But this would have been, just, I know a follow-up question that's going to be asked, this would have been around closer to noon, is that correct?
Right.
All right, thank you.
And so when you saw that it was G, did you keep going?
No, I was still in my car,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
I didn't. I sat there because I was waiting to get the dishes.
And let's see here. Do you remember what Miss Dixon was like? Do you recognize Exhibit 297?
It's Rhonda.
Is this Rhonda?
Mhm.
Let's write. I'm going to write Rhonda at the top. Okay. And where did she live in relationship to Mr. Davidson's house?
She was about 3 or 4 houses down on the same side.
I'd like to move Exhibit 297 in as evidence.
No objection.
And so you said that while you were there, Rhonda's giving you some dishes. I think, did the dishes belong to your grandma?
Yeah, Rhonda was there and my cousin, and they lived together. And my cousin had left, and he left the dishes.
And so did you get your dishes from Rhonda?
I did.
And once you got your dishes from Rhonda, what did you then do?
I left.
And did you try to go home?
Yes, I did.
What happened when you tried to go home?
The train had stopped, so I couldn't go down Cherry Street the way that I normally would go. And so I turned around and went another way.
And so I know as you sit here today, you don't know what time this was, but we know that it is whenever the train was stopped on Cherry Street.
You know, I know it was between 11:30 to 12:30 because I had a date and I was trying to get there.
Okay, so between 11:30 and 12:30.
Mm-hmm.
Now also, let me go back to the phone call that you made to Mr. Davidson. So you make the phone call to Mr. Davidson, that's going to be Sunday morning, you believe around 4 a.m.?
Yeah,
Did he answer?
he did.
And what did you notice about his voice?
Heavy breathing. He talked normally to me, but he was breathing heavy.
And what did you tell him?
And I told him, he had told me he was going to come over there and bring me the money. And I told him I needed it by Monday because I had to pay my bill. But he was breathing heavy. And I said to him, you need to calm down because you're breathing so heavy. And I know he had some kind of problem. I can't remember what it was. And I said, you sound like you're exerting yourself and you need to calm down.
And so, and then that Sunday, so then you go over there between 11:30 and 12:30, Sunday morning.
Right,
Have that conversation with Rhonda.
right.
You see Mr. Thomas walking on Chittenden Street.
G.
Yes, I'm sorry. All right, so you go home. Do you go back over there?
I went back the next morning
And so that's gonna be Monday.
The
And why do
Monday
you go
morning.
back the next morning?
to get my money.
Because you have to pay your KUB bill.
Right, that's why I went back.
When you go back Monday morning, do you notice anybody?
No, the house would look like, as I pulled up, and I noticed all the windows were down, and the blinds was down, which that was unusual, because of whatever condition he had, they always kept the windows up. And no cars were around, and I said, it's like a ghost town. And then I looked down the street, and I seen police officers, and they were looking in the, what is it, the drain?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So let me show you on Exhibit 27. If I can show you Exhibit 27. If this here is Chipman Street and this is Glider, do you see on Exhibit 27 where you saw the police looking in a drain?
Yeah, right in there.
Let's mark that. You want to just mark an X on Exhibit 27 where you saw the police looking like in a drain? Thank you. And after you saw that, what did you then do?
I left.
Did you ever see Mr. Davidson?
No,
Take it you never got your money for your furniture.
no.
Thank you.
Nothing further. You can step down, thank you. Any objection to her leaving?
No, you're not.
What read you go?
That's good. Jones, Miss Jones now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the next witness is likely to be lengthy, so we'll take a quick break here. Just please go with your court officer.
be seated.
Still wait to call?
Wait a call.
Is this wait to call?
Yes, sir.
You can proceed, John.
Get our next witness, Sheriff Jones.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give in the hearing of this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please have a seat.
For the record, give us your name, please.
Jimmy J. Jones.
And you're the former sheriff of Knox County, is that correct?
I am.
And give us, the jury, a little bit about your background in law enforcement and how you came to be sheriff and what you're doing now.
I started at the sheriff's office in 1980 as a correctional officer. Went out on patrol 1982. I worked my way up into the detective division. I was a lieutenant over the major crimes section. I was the chief of detectives and ultimately the administrative chief. And then in 2007, I was appointed sheriff.
That'd be the later part of 2007.
It was at February.
February 2007. So in January 2007, what was your position with the sheriff?
I was administrative chief.
And sheriff was Tim Hutchison at the time?
It was.
In January 2007, early part of January 2007, did you have occasion to learn of murders that had occurred in Chipman Street?
I did.
And what was the sheriff department's response to that?
Sheriff Hutchison had responded to help, and he wanted me to go with him to help also.
And when you say go with him, where did you go?
Well, on the day in question, on the 11th, we went to London, Kentucky, or Lebanon, Kentucky, I'm sorry.
Okay. How did you get there?
We went in a helicopter,
And
the Knox County Sheriff's Office helicopter.
And you recall who all went up there from the sheriff's department?
Detective Neville Norman and Sheriff Hutchison.
Any others that you know?
There was a couple of pilots and other people, but basically it was just us three that,
And what was the purpose of going to Lebanon, Kentucky?
to find the suspects that had left from the Chipman Street address.
And when you got to Lebanon, were you able to locate the individuals in question?
We were.
And where did you first encounter them?
We ultimately met at the police department, and then along with the Kentucky State Police, we went to the residence where the individuals were.
And were you able to locate those individuals?
We were.
And eventually conduct some interviews?
We did.
Now, back in June 2007, and even since then, have you received training in interrogation techniques and the like when it comes to interrogating suspects?
Yes, I was lucky. I'm sorry, you'll have to bear with me. My allergies are running amok. But I was lucky enough to work for a sheriff who believed in training, and I received many hours of training on many different things. But yes, interviewing technique, homicide investigation, all those types of things.
And during your career in law enforcement, have you had occasion to interview few or many suspects?
Many.
Now, getting back to January 11th in Kentucky, do you recall the order in which you interviewed these individuals?
Yes, Vanessa Coleman was first, Cobbins was second, and Mr. Thomas was third.
And these were interviews, all of them, were they recorded?
They were
On what type of recording?
CDs.
Okay. And as it relates to Mr. Thomas, so he was the last of the three that you interviewed?
He was.
And before you interviewed him, of course, did you go over his Miranda rights with him?
Yes, sir, we did.
I think that at that time he was not under arrest, is that correct? Or he was being detained?
Yes.
At he's not charged with any
No.
crime, is that correct? Didn't have an attorney,
No,
but you went over the rights with him?
absolutely,
Where he would agree to talk with you?
absolutely.
Now, as you were interviewing Mr. Thomas, did you have some idea of involvement of individuals in these crimes down here?
We did. There was communication back and forth between law enforcement here and law enforcement there about things that were going on here in Knoxville also.
And when you began to interview Mr. Thomas, did you have at least a nickname E as someone that might possibly be involved?
We did,
Did you have that information in that interview?
yes.
And I'll ask you, if early on in that interview, you asked Mr. Thomas if he remembered a short, bald-headed, light-skinned black dude showing up over there, and was he in his own car? And Mr. Thomas saying short, and you I guess kind of interject, they called him E, you remember that?
Yes, I
Part of
do.
the interview? And
He immediately responded
Okay. And
that he knew him.
That he knew it? Did he hesitate at all?
None whatsoever. That was what I thought was very pertinent about that question. He immediately responded when I gave him the nickname.
Didn't say, who you talking about? What you
No,
talking about?
immediately said yes, I remember.
And a little later on in that interview, asking Mr. Thomas, do you remember a point in time where Slim and E, and for the record, who was Slim known to you at that time?
Mr. Davidson,
And where Slim and E and Rome, who was Rome?
Coppins,
All left together in Slim's car, or in E's car, and you stayed there, you and Vanessa, and I guess Sheriff Hutchinson says Saturday night, and you say Saturday evening, and Mr. Thomas says, yeah, you remember that?
yes.
Again, how did he respond? His demeanor when he responded?
It's like I said, it was there was no apprehension, no trying to think. He just immediately responded like one would if you were asked a question and you knew the answer to it.
And then shortly after that, you remember giving this question, Mr. Thomas, okay, all right, at some point in time, a white SUV came back with Slim and E, and Rome was driving E's car. You remember?
I do.
That question? Do you remember that? You came out to the front little sunroom porch. Do you remember that? And he said, yeah.
Yes,
Again, did he answer in the same manner?
he did.
With the same speed?
Exactly.
And the same demeanor?
Yes.
And just right after that, asking this question, okay, do you remember when E and Slim got out of the car, they had a white guy and white girl with them, and they had blindfold over their eyes, and their hands was tied? And him responding, yeah, I remember seeing them.
Yes, sir. And I also, again, I think that's a very pertinent question because if you didn't see someone blindfolded and hands tied, and I ask you that question, you certainly would say, no, I didn't see anything like that. But he responded, yes.
And a little later on, in there asking him, and talking about the white dude, I guess, is what Mr. Thomas may have referred to. And you asked him this question, well, how was, I'm sorry, it's on page 8. I apologize for not giving the page for the other transcript. When you saw him, how was he? And Mr. Thomas responded, when I saw him, he was blindfolded or something. And you asked him, was his hands tied? And Mr. Thomas saying, I'm pretty sure they were.
Yes, that's correct.
And throughout this interview, Mr. Thomas has given you some responses, but was he being totally forthcoming with
No,
you?
and that's typical. You can be forthcoming until you start to get yourself involved with it. Then you want to distance yourself from the event. You will go up to a certain point, and then you will distance yourself from the event. So it's like you aren't there or you didn't have anything to do with it. That's quite typical.
And is that what you got from Mr. Thomas?
Absolutely.
Again, when you're talking to him again about who all's there when they come back on page 12, I guess Detective Norman asked when they came back, and Mr. Thomas said, yeah, that's when I saw all three of them, and I was And I was looking like, okay, and you asked three of them being, and he says, Slim, E, and Ron.
Correct.
Again, giving you that information?
Yes.
Did he give it to you as he described previously?
Yes.
And then right after that, asking, I guess Detective Norman asked him, was E's car there too? And answered, yes, his car was there.
Yes.
And again, asked again, and they were all tied up, and he answered, yeah.
Yes, every time that came up, he answered yes to that, each and every time.
And then Mr. Thomas saying a little later on, basically what I know, that the girl went into the room, and the old boy, they took him back out. And you asked who took him back out, and he said, well, it was E and Slim, because they took him back. They took him outside.
Yes.
And then a little later on, Mr. Thomas saying, well, they came inside, and that's when we was looking like, okay. Then they took the dude out, took him outside, and you asked who took him out. Again, he said that E and Slim, I believe, took him outside.
Yes, correct.
You asked him, did you ever see a pistol? And he was saying, I've seen a lot of pistols.
Yeah, I think at that point in time, he had realized that we knew what he knew. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And he was, I think that was an attempt to be coy with me when he said, I've seen a lot of pistols. And so then I kind of ratcheted up the conversation, and he ultimately said he had a pistol.
And then, I guess shortly after that, asked him again about the dude and who left. And he said the dude and E left. The dude being Mr. Newsom.
Yes, that's correct.
And I believe that's where you said you ratcheted up a little bit about this gun a little bit.
Yes.
More. Is that correct? I believe you described that to him as like fishing.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. And you asking him, or Detective Norman asking, did he have a gun? Did Slim have a gun when they left? And him saying he had a gun
He did.
when they left. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then right after that, you asked, okay, so E and this white guy leaving the car, and he said, uh-huh.
Correct.
An affirmative answer.
Yes, an
Not
affirmative
yes,
answer.
no.
Yes.
And then you ask him again when they come back, who comes back? And he answers, he came back. You say, by himself? He said, he came back. And you say, no white dude? Not unless he was inside the car.
That's correct. Yes.
Give that answer
He did.
quickly to you?
Yes.
I mean, ask him again about the gun. Mr. Thomas, or Detective Norman asked him, did he have a gun with him? And Mr. Thomas responded, I mean, I didn't see no gun, but I'm pretty sure he had one. And Detective Norman saying, but you saw he had one when he left? And Mr. Thomas saying, yeah, I mean, I know he had a gun.
Right. It's correct.
And go on to describe it as a black gun, and he thought it was a revolver.
Thought it was a revolver. Yes, sir.
And you recall toward the end of the interview, talking about asking Mr. Thomas about going over to some apartments in this SUV, and Detective Norman talking about when you all had the music playing real loud, and he acknowledged, yeah, okay, I remember. I just said we went a couple of places.
Yeah, a couple of places, I think is what he said.
And you also remember asking about him trying to leave, but they wouldn't let him leave with this question: why couldn't you leave? And Mr. Thomas gave the answer, because ain't nobody, didn't nobody want nobody to leave at that. And you asked, who didn't want nobody to leave? And he says E mainly.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, the E that he's talking about is there, boys.
It is.
Defendant sees over here.
Yes, sir, it is.
And then just toward the very end, you remember Mr. Thomas telling you, he left out with the old boy, then when we left, we came back, I mean, I didn't see the girl, and I know I didn't see the boy.
Correct.
Again, with giving you that information still, that even at the end of that interview, did you feel like he was still holding back?
Oh, yeah, of course. And at some point in time, you have to end it. It can't just keep going on and on and on. So at some point, you come to the point where you think this is all he's going to give us. And what he gave us, I thought was very truthful. I thought he was the most truthful one that I talked to. But you never get the whole truth, ever. I've been doing this for 39 years, and it just doesn't happen.
And again, these are questions and answers that were given back in January 2007, correct?
That's correct.
Passing the
Needless to say, it had been a long day whenever you were talking to Mr. Thomas.
It had been a very long day.
I gather the helicopter ride was not a fun,
It was not fun at all.
rough trip.
It was very rough.
And when you got there, I believe you said you first talked to Ms. Coleman, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you spoke to Mr. Cobbins, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so you had already talked to Mr. Cobbins before you had gone into the interview room with Mr. Thomas, right?
Correct.
And of course, with the training that you've received, you understand that when you interview different types of individuals, there are some individuals who are at least susceptible to suggestion, correct?
Correct.
And one of the ways to safeguard against when you're talking to one of those individuals is to not feed them details, correct?
Well, I would disagree with you on that. I would prefer to call it jogging the memory. The human mind, sometimes when incidents occur, when you talk about them, you will remember more about that incident than you did initially.
But you would agree with me that there are such things as false confessions.
I'm sorry.
There are such things as false confessions.
Yes.
Yes. And one way that an officer can inadvertently elicit a false confession is to provide details about the crime that was committed, correct?
Well, I don't know about that. I would say that some questions that are asked, such as the question about the boy and the girl being blindfolded and handcuffed, that would be what I would call a shocker question to elicit a response that if you had not seen that, your response would immediately be, no, that didn't happen.
But that was not a detail that Mr. Thomas had provided you up to that point in the interview.
No,
And this was fairly early on in this interview, correct?
it was early on.
Okay. And those particular details, you said that you had gotten information that had come to you from Knoxville, is that correct?
There was information coming back and forth from Knoxville, yes.
Primarily Daphne Sutton?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay. But at that point in time, had they talked to LaMarcus Davidson that you're aware of?
Yes.
Okay, so you had talked to him.
No, I had not talked to him.
No, but
He had been apprehended in Knoxville.
okay, and investigators had talked to him.
I assume, I do not know that.
Okay. But at least as far as who you had talked to, you had talked to Latavius Cobbins first, correct?
Coleman first, then Cobbins.
And then Cobbins. Before you talked to Mr. Thomas, you talked to Mr. Cobbins.
Correct.
All right. And so the detail about these two people showing up, being bound and blindfolded, is that something that you had gotten from Mr. Cobbins?
No, I don't think so. I don't recall that.
Or was that a detail from where?
I think that was a detail.
From
that-
at the
I don't
crime
know.
scene?
I can't say for sure.
Okay. And about E being involved, a short, bald, light-skinned black dude. That
Yes,
detail.
And that was very early on, and that was after he was the best of my recollection is that was because he was apprehended with Mr. Davidson.
Okay, so E, the whole reason that he even came up as being a person of interest is because he had been there when Mr. Davidson was taken into custody.
I don't know about that, if that's the way it was in Knoxville. I knew that from him being with Mr. Davidson.
But Mr. Thomas did not mention E.
Mr. Thomas, when asked about E, first said he knew an E in Kentucky. Then, almost immediately, he said, well, I don't know if he was there or not because I was getting my stuff in a hurry to leave.
Yeah. And at least when you first...
And that was the only thing that was said about E from Mr. Cobb.
Okay. And then, on who? Who were you just referring to?
I'm sorry?
Which suspect?
You asked the question if Mr. Cobbin said anything about E.
Okay. Now, but again, bringing up the E, you're the one who said you remember the short, bald-headed, light-skinned black dude showing up over there.
I did.
And that was a detail that you provided.
It was.
And at least at first, his response was a short, and then you even told him, they called him E.
Correct.
And at that point, he says, yeah, I remember seeing him, correct?
Exactly. As soon as I said E, he immediately responded.
Yeah. And then Sheriff Hutchinson, at that point in time, brings up about Slim and E and Rome all left together. So the detail about Slim and E and Rome leaving together in E's car, that was something, again, that was provided by detectives, correct?
I'm not sure.
And then certainly about them coming back up to the sun porch, that again was something that y'all first brought up in your interview with Mr. Thomas.
About Mr. Thomas being on the sun porch?
About the white SUV coming back with Slim and E and Rome.
Yes, and we had received information that he was on the sun porch, and that's why I used that to jog his memory. And he immediately said, yes, I remember that.
But that was information you got from somewhere else.
Yes.
And he agreed. He was going along with what you were saying.
He did.
And again, with them being blindfolded and their hands tied, that was information that y'all brought up and that he was agreeing with.
Yes.
And then as the interview progressed and he was providing details, he was, in a sense, reaffirming those details that were first provided. Correct?
That's correct, yes.
Now, and he was a little difficult. I mean, he's a little difficult to interview. He wasn't too forthcoming.
Well, and not many individuals are.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you'll get somebody who will bare their soul, but that's pretty unusual.
Yes, very unusual.
And this was one of those that you're having to draw it out.
It's always give and take, yes.
Yes. And so he wasn't coming off with too much about what had happened there, but on the stuff that he agreed with, he
didn't want to. He just didn't want to put he didn't want to implicate himself.
But again, he was just reaffirming information that initially had been provided by y'all.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Anything further in this witness?
Oh, no. Thank you, sir. Maybe.
Any objection to it?
No, Your Honor.
You're free to go.
Lee, thank you.
Tim Shea, Your Honor, apologize. Witnesses is not here.
I think we're moving at a pretty quick pace.
We're waiting on Tim Shea. He tells us he'll be here in 10 minutes. Apologize. Yeah, we can do that. I'll put this out.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give in the hearing of this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Indeed.
Please have a seat.
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Mary Newsom.
Ms. Newsom, your relationship to Chris Newsom?
I'm his mother.
If you could, let's go back to January 2007. Recall Saturday afternoon, or start Saturday morning.
Saturday morning, Chris got up and he was an avid golfer, and that's what he was going to do all day long, was play golf.
Now, tell us when he went to play, did you know who he was playing golf with?
I knew he was playing with Josh Anderson, who's one of the people he was playing with, and if there was somebody else, I'm not sure who other people were.
Now, tell us a little bit about Chris. Did he work? Did he go to school? What did he do?
Well, he graduated from Halls High School. At the time of this happening, he was 23 years old and he was working. He had a job, several jobs. First of all, he went to a school in Orlando for motorcycle repair and watercraft repair, and he was certified in that and decided that's what he wanted to do. And he did that for about a year and a half and had a job doing that, and he didn't enjoy it. So he wanted to go back to carpentry, which he really enjoyed. He was a trim carpenter, and he made a lot of different projects and things with his hands. He loved working with his hands, and he did that. He was working for B&F Construction when this happened, and helped build some beautiful homes.
Now, did you come to learn about a Christian, Channon Christian?
Yes, that was his girlfriend.
And do you know how long they had been dating?
It wasn't that long. I believe they started dating in October.
And so then jumping ahead to January 2007, that first Saturday, he said he was going to play golf.
Yes.
Tell us about, after playing golf, did you see him again?
Yes, he came home to get ready for a date that he had. He came home to take a shower and said he was going to go out with Channon that night. And when he came down the steps that night, that was the last time I saw him. And before he left, I said, Chris, I think you should get something to eat. And he said, no. He said, I'm taking Channon out to eat, and then we're going to a party over at Jamie's house. And I said, okay.
Were you expecting him back that night?
I didn't know for sure, because sometimes when he'd go out, he'd stay the night, and sometimes he'd come back home. He was 23 at the time, so I couldn't question him too much. He was kind of on his own.
So did you hear from him later on that night?
No.
Was that odd?
It wasn't that odd that night, because I didn't really expect him home that night, so it wasn't anything strange.
Did something happen the next day that caused your attention?
The next day, when we got a phone call from Shannon's mother, and Channon hadn't showed up at work, that started a panic at our house.
So what did you then do?
Started calling Chris to see if he was, would answer me, because any other time, if I called Chris, he would call back. Not always immediately, but he would call back. And he wouldn't call back, and I kept calling several different times and saying, Chris, please call me, let me know you're okay. Never got the call. So we decided to call the police. And of course, when they're 23, the police won't start looking for them until after 24 hours. But it was very unusual for him to be not calling home or checking in at home. So they said they couldn't really help at all, but what we should do is just start calling the hospitals and see if anybody showed up at the hospital. So that's what we did. We started calling, and then what I can remember is it wasn't until the next morning, though, that somebody, showed up at the door, and I started calling the family to let the family know that Chris was not home and he was missing. So the family started coming over, and we were waiting for him. We stayed up all night waiting for him and kept trying to call him, and I think it was around 2 o'clock in the morning when we found out that somebody had found their car, and the kids were not around the car. So we knew at that time that something bad must have happened to him, because they wouldn't have left the car like that. And then there was a bunch of the friends did come over that night and said they didn't want to let me know that Chris was missing because they knew I'd get upset, so they put off coming over. But when they finally did, then we really, really got concerned about it. And we didn't hear anything until the next morning, and that's when Snotterly came over and the chaplain came over and someone else and told us that the body that they had found on the railroad tracks was Grace. And after that, I just kind of lost it and didn't remember much of anything for the next 2 weeks. It was just unbelievable. I just couldn't believe that that had happened.
Want to go through just a couple of the pictures about some of Chris's personal items. You recognize the ball cap in Exhibit 140?
I do. Chris loved wearing the ball cap, and he always turned it around the opposite way.
Okay.
And I can't see the other cap there hardly, but I know it's the D&F cap.
Yes, ma'am.
That's his work cap.
All right, let's see if that's in the next picture.
Yeah, that's
146.
his work cap.
All right. Exhibit 150, did Chris did Copenhagen?
Yes, unfortunately.
All right. Now, in 161, those are the two hats there again.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next one.
Yes.
Did you ever get his license back?
No.
It's 189. So if I can direct your attention, do you see his car keys?
I
And
see him.
You see them?
Yes.
Is that them there?
Yes, it looks like him.
What type of vehicle did he have?
He had a Chevy Silverado 1500.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You have a problem with that? No questions, Your Honor. Step down. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give in the hearing of this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes, sir. Please have a seat.
Give the jury your name, please, ma'am.
Dina Christian.
Your mother of Channon Christian.
Yes, I am.
Taking your attention back to January 2007, January 6th specifically, remember that day?
I do.
And did you have contact with Channon on that day?
Yes, sir, I do.
Tell the jury about that, please.
Well, she woke up that morning. She had to be at work at noon. So she got up and took a shower. It was a Saturday, so I was home cleaning house. When she got out of the shower, I had folded some laundry, so I took some clothes in there for her, put it on her bed, and I just sat down and we started talking. She was trying to decide what to wear for her date that night.
Say she had work that day. Where did she work?
She worked at the shoe department in Westtown Mall, and she also worked for Specialty Select at Fort Sanders Hospital.
Two different jobs?
Yes, and she was a senior at the University of Tennessee.
In school at the time?
Yes, full load.
And working two jobs?
Yes, sir.
So your understanding on that Saturday, January 6th, she was to work. Did you know how long she was scheduled?
She would have worked till 9, which means she would have gotten out of there probably about 9:30, and then she was supposed to go to Kara's house, her best friend, and then they were going to go. Well, They were supposed to go to a birthday party, but she had been sick and she had not been eating well, so Chris wanted to make sure that she got something to eat, so he wanted to take her to dinner before they went to the party.
Now, what time did she leave, the house she lived in with y'all at the time?
Yes, she lived at home.
And you know, about what time she leave that morning?
It was probably about 11:30, 11:40, something like that.
Remember what she had on?
She had on, if I can remember correctly, they were mini well corduroy pants and a t-shirt and these ugly shoes. Her wallabies, but they were very comfortable, she said.
Okay. And also, at that time, had she gone to did she have some clothes that she was going to donate or take?
Well, yeah, those had been in her forerunner because it was just about a week or so after Christmas, and she'd gotten some new clothes for Christmas. So she cleaned out her closet. She had them in sacks, you know, like almost like a gift bag kind of thing that they give you when you have a lot of stuff. And she had several of those in the back of her car full of clothes that she was going to donate.
Now, tell us about this vehicle that she had.
She had a silver 4Runner Sport. That was her dream car.
And how, you recall what year it was, how new it was?
It was brand new when she got it. I'm not exactly sure of the model, but it was probably around 2006 or 5, something like that.
And was there a rule about keeping that vehicle clean?
Oh yes, her daddy was a stickler about cars being clean. He was constantly arguing with us about keeping our car clean, but it might be messy inside, but if there was dirt or a spot or anything, she made dang sure it came off before Daddy came home. So.
Now, on that January 6th, that Saturday, what was the last time you had any contact with her?
When she walked out the door to go to work, I was standing there and I told her, you know, to have a good day and to be careful and that I loved her. And she walked out the door and said, "Love you too. I'll see you later."
What, were you expecting her home?
No, sir.
And why is that?
She was a senior at the University of Tennessee living at home, and her brother was in Greenville at college. So we told her rather than, she didn't want to live in the dorm and she didn't want an apartment, we told her we'd give her some freedom, but the deal was, she just let me know what was going on, if she was coming home or where she was. So she was very good about doing that.
And what were her plans?
Her plans that night were to go to work and then go to Kara's and get ready for the party, or go eat and then go to the party.
And spend the night with Kara?
Yes.
Did she
Whether it was at Kara's apartment or Jamie's, I knew she would be safe and she would be with Kara.
And did she take some clothing and?
Yes, she took an overnight bag.
For the stay over, I guess?
Yes.
All right. So all through the day, you think else unusual happened?
She called me sometime that afternoon, and I'm not sure exactly what time it was. It might have been around 5 o'clock, 4:35, something like that, and told me that she'd gotten off early. They had overbooked people to work, so she volunteered to go home early since she had plans. And she was on her way to Kara's, but she was going to go by Walgreens and get Kara some shampoo, and then she was going to go get ready.
The plan still being to go to the party?
Yes,
Get
sir.
something to eat, go to the party?
Yes, sir.
Stay with Kara or at the
Or
party?
Jamie's, yes.
Okay. Did you talk with her anymore after that?
She called the house about 12:30 that night, or Sunday morning, whatever, but I didn't get to talk to her. I was in the restroom and the phone rang, so I hollered at her dad to grab the phone because, you know, at 12:30 you're not usually expecting the phone to ring.
And after that call, did you talk to Gary about
I did,
that phone call?
because I could tell by his side of the conversation that he was talking to her.
Okay.
So before he went back to sleep, I'm like, you know, what'd she say, what was going on? And he said that she was planning to come home around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They were going to finish watching a movie.
And did she say where she was?
She was at Kara's apartment, is what she said.
What she said? Okay. So when you heard that, what did you do to?
Well, I figured something just had changed. You know, the plans changed. Maybe they didn't have the party or whatever, and I just expected her to be home. So I'm a night owl, and I was sitting there watching TV, and I thought, well, I'm still up. I'll wait. Because her dad was asleep and her brother was asleep, and we have 4 dogs at the time. And I thought, I'd just watch for her to come in, because I could see, sitting in my bed watching TV, I could see the street behind us. And when I saw the lights coming down the street, I was just gonna go open the garage door so the dogs wouldn't freak out and wake their daddy and their brother.
At that phone call around 12:30, after that phone call, was there any alarm between you and Gary?
No,
After
because
the phone call?
she did what she said she was gonna do. You know, I heard her dad say, "I love you," and I knew the conversation was over, so I immediately asked him what was going on. But at that time, there was no concern because she called. Her plans changed, she called, and I was just expecting her to be there. And then about I looked up and saw it was 3:30 and she wasn't home, and that's when I started getting worried.
And what'd you do?
I called her phone.
When you called her phone, you know about
That
what
was-
time it was?
It was around 3:30 in the morning. There was no answer. 3 or 3:30, something like that. There was no answer. I waited a few minutes. I called again, and it would go straight to voicemail. I'd wait a few more minutes, and it might ring or go straight to voicemail. But it constantly did that all morning long or all night long.
You know about how many times you tried to call?
I don't know, sir. I called several times, and I was starting to get concerned because the one thing I know, even if she was asleep, if it woke her up, she would call home right away. She would call mom and dad right back.
And you said some of the calls would just ring and then go to voicemail, and some of them would go directly to voicemail. Did I understand that
Yes, sir.
correctly?
It's like, you know, when you turn your phone off, it goes straight to voicemail, right? Well, it would ring and ring and ring and then go to voicemail. And then the next time I'd call, it wouldn't even ring. It would go straight to her voicemail. So I thought that was kind of odd. I was starting to get a bad feeling, but I didn't know. I worry a lot anyway, so.
So when the phone went straight to voicemail, did you think her phone was off at that point in
I
time?
thought, well, did her phone die at first? So I just picked up, call again, and then it would ring, 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 ring. And so I was a little confused.
So it back and forth with
Yes, sir.
that type of thing. Okay. So what's the next thing that you did?
Well, I finally fell asleep for a couple of hours, I guess. And then I woke up, her dad was getting ready for work, and I'm like, well, dang it, she still ain't called me back. And he said, well, call her back.
And did you
So I did.
get an answer
I went to voicemail.
straight to, or did it ring and ring?
Well, I called her several times that morning too, and it did the same thing. One minute it might ring, and the next minute it wouldn't. And I did leave a voicemail at one point earlier on or later in that morning after it was daylight. You know, I'm like, dang it, Shannon, you know, this is your mom. You need to call me back. Call me back now, because I was getting a little concerned.
I told you never heard back from her.
No, sir.
You ever got a call from her phone?
No, and I'd also tried to call her best friend Kara several times because they were joined at the hip, and you know, she was like one of my own, and I couldn't get her to answer as well, and that was upsetting me, but I didn't know at the time.
Come find out she'd changed the phone.
Yeah, she finally called me sometime that afternoon, but
That's in Sunday afternoon?
yes, sir. And I asked her about Shannon and Chris, and then I think she was probably a little alarmed as well because it was not like Shannon not to call her back either, so.
So on into Sunday afternoon, when all that's going on, what's your level of concern?
It's getting worse and worse as the day goes. I don't call it mother's instinct or whatever. I just had a gut feeling that something wasn't right.
Now, tell us about the rest of the evening.
Well, after I talked to Kara, I think she talked to some of Chris's friends, and they were trying to think of any place they might have gone just to be alone or whatever, and couldn't get anything. So about 3 o'clock that afternoon, the phone rang, and I answered it, and it was her boss from the shoe department, Doug. And he said, hey, Dina. I said, what's going on, Doug? He said, I'm just calling to check on Shannon. I said, what are you talking about? He said, she was supposed to open the store at noon. And I could just feel my gut drop. And it was like, you just confirmed my worst nightmare. I knew something was wrong because she would never shuck her responsibility. I mean, she'd been there for a long time, and she even had a key, you know, and they trusted her enough to take bank statements or bank deposits to the bank and open and close the store. And that just wasn't like my daughter. I knew something was wrong with her.
So at around 3 o'clock, you say?
Yes, sir.
So when that happened, what do y'all do?
Well, I think I first called her dad and told her dad that something was wrong. And then I don't know what that conversation, I just remember calling him, and then I called the hospitals, and then I called the police, I called 911.
A report or missing.
And then they said they checked the jail for me because they needed to make sure she hadn't been arrested or nothing had gone on in that direction, so.
Once you found out what in jail or hospitals or that.
I filed a report over the 911 with the 911 operator, and she was very helpful and helped me. She even called me back and suggested that I possibly try to see where her phone had pinged from. I'm sorry. And I did call US Cellular, was our provider at the time, and all 4 phones were in my name, so. But they said they couldn't do it for me, that the police would have to do it. So I called back, and someone, I don't know who did it, but someone at the police department was able to call, and without a warrant, they were able to provide the information.
The pinging information.
And then they finally told us that it pinged off the Cherry Street Tower.
And did that alarm you? Even
I knew she wouldn't be anywhere on Cherry Street. She would have been scared to death to be down there.
So once you learned where that phone had pinged, what did y'all do next?
Well, I had been told by the 911 operator that a detective would call me, because, I'd filed a report. And I mean, it went on, and I guess it was dark, so it was after 7 o'clock sometime, and he finally called back after I called like 2 or 3 times, waiting for a detective to call us. And it wasn't a very pleasant conversation, because he basically told me that nobody was looking for my daughter, and nobody was going to look for my daughter, and if we wanted to do something to do, or if we wanted to find her, we needed to do it ourselves. So that's exactly what we did.
And what did you do?
Well, Gary got his keys, Chase got his keys, and I was told to stay home in case she called or someone called. And of course, he didn't even know how to get to Cherry Street at the time. And he called Jack Barnes, who was a retired, I don't know if it's KPD or Knox County, but called him, and that little man got up in the late evening and went to Cherry Street, told Gary to hang on. He met him down there, and then he set them up on a grid search.
Is this late Sunday?
Sunday evening. I don't know what time it was, I just know it was dark.
That's fine.
And so I can't stand just to sit there, so I know I drove him crazy. About every 10 minutes or so I'd probably call, you got anything yet, what's going on? And he finally called me, I think, and said Chase found the car.
And did you get the information about the car being altered somehow?
No, sir, I just immediately said, I've got the spare key, I'm on my way, and I took off for Cherry Street. And when I got down there, first thing I noticed, because I came in on, is it Glider? From her rear end was facing me, and I knew the power T and the North Face stickers were gone. I could just see the rear end.
But you recognize it to be that her car?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And when I pulled up beside them, it was drizzling, and they had called the forensics unit to come there rather than to try to cart it off, I guess. So we were just sitting around waiting on him, and I asked an officer if they'd gone door to door, and he said, no, we can't be so sure that she didn't come down here by herself. And when they opened the car, I told that officer, and excuse me, but you want what I said, I told him he was full of shit. That there was no way my daughter was down there buying drugs, and there was no way she could drive the car that way because the seat was as far back as it would go and laid back as far back as it would go.
Did you notice anything on the outside of the car as far as?
Oh yeah, she had she loved the University of Tennessee, okay? She had a huge power T on the back rear window of the 4Runner. She had an orange North Face sticker on one side, and then she had 2 baby power Ts on the back door little windows, and then she had Bevo on the front, and she had a University of Tennessee license plate on the front of the car. And when Chase turned around, he said, I know it's her car, Bevo's still there. So they had pulled every sticker off but the long one, because they couldn't see it for the rearview mirror.
Did you notice whether there'd been any wiping or anything of the car?
Oh, when they opened the car, first off I saw the seat in the driver's side because that was the first one, and I knew she had not driven that car. Then when they opened the back door, the floorboard was full of mud, and there was no way that would have been there, she'd been there. When they opened the back end, that whole back end would have been full of clothes. I mean, and she had her college books in the back seat. You know how girls are. They travel with a lot of things, but she had some leftover clothes because she stayed with Carrie usually during the week because they went to school together. So they didn't need but one parking pass. So I would usually see her at different times in the evenings when she got more clothes, or then for sure on the weekend to get her dirty clothes so Mama could wash them. So, but there was nothing there.
All that stuff was gone.
And it looked like it had been wiped down, vacuumed down, all but that mud stuff. And then I saw her iPod wasn't in there, and then she had a picture of her granddaddy where the speedometer sits. It was gone. I mean, we were not supposed to touch the car, but we got close enough we could see in, and everything was gone. There was nothing in there except a jacket, and then a few things in her glove box.
What's the next thing that happened?
We just stood there in the rain until the forensics man did his thing, and then when he opened the glove box, they asked me a couple of questions because they found a needle in her glove box with some insulin. And one of her good friends, the one they went to the party for, Jamie Hampton, was a diabetic. So I said, that wasn't Shannon's, but it was probably Jamie's.
Okay.
And then they found another bottle, I think that was Ronnie Lynn's. And I mean, these girls ran together all the time. You know, it was nothing to have. Half the time I didn't know if they were really Shannon's clothes or Kara's clothes because, you know, they were constantly switching things out. So they were always together, but it was just an empty bottle of Adderall.
So they processed that vehicle, I guess they towed it at some point?
Yes, or they processed it to a point, I think, and then they towed it to the impound lot.
Did there come a time then after that that you learned about Mr. Newsom?
Yes, sir. I was worried about, let me back up just a little bit. Sunday afternoon, after I called the police and started filing the report, I had never met the Newsoms. So Kara didn't have their number, so I just grabbed the phone book and I looked and I saw one U Newsom in Halls. I thought, well, what can it hurt? If it's the wrong one, I'll just say I'm sorry and hang up. But it was Hugh and Mary, and I explained to them that I thought we had a problem with the kids were missing.
And so they responded.
And so that's when they started looking. But once, you know, when we realized after we found her car, after they processed it and we went home for a few hours, and then the next morning, pretty much at daylight, we got up and her dad and I went to the FBI, but they couldn't help us because she was 21. You know, we couldn't get anybody to help us. We felt like we were just all alone. And so we took off for Cherry Street. And we didn't go door to door on the homes that were occupied, but I mean, we went into abandoned homes and warehouses. I mean, I saw some of her friends crawling under abandoned homes that they probably, places that none of us really needed to be, that weren't safe, but we were just trying to find our kid. And then
That was Monday?
that was Monday.
Monday morning.
All day Monday.
All day.
And then I guess I'm not exactly sure because, like Mary said, after it was just a blur. But I think when we found out that the body on the railroad tracks was Chris's, I knew it was not going to be good for us either. But we just kept looking, and when they identified Chris's body is when KPD, Knox County, I mean, I think we had ATF, we had U.S. Marshals, we had everybody. They ended up down on the railroad tracks and asked us to get out of their way, basically. I mean, they were nice about it, but Sheriff Hutchinson had set up a command post at a little restaurant right there on Cherry Street, and that's pretty much where we stayed. Now, I know we had a few people, or Gary had a few kind of watching where they were going, because, you know, we couldn't stand just to stand there, but we weren't going anywhere till we found their daughter.
And is that where you were when you found out that Channon had been found?
Yes, sir.
Did you learn the circumstances at that time, or was it?
At that time, no, I don't believe that I did. I just, you know, they said they'd found her and she was deceased, and then all of them were screaming, and I fell apart.
And of course, from that point forward, of course, they talked to you about certain items of Channon that they may have found either inside this house or up in Kentucky.
Not at that time. I mean, at that time, they pretty much told us, we didn't know what to do. We just stood there forever for a long time, and then we went home. We just didn't know what to do. But we did have a meeting with the powers that be at one point, just to kind of let us know what was going on. But they were still, at the beginning, before they found Channon, I'd gone home with a police officer and gotten a brush for the dog to scent to try to help find her. But I mean, eventually, yes, they did, and there were several things throughout the years while the trials were getting ready that I kept asking, well, I know she had this bag, I know she had her camera, I know she had this or that, and there were several things that we never found.
I want to go through some photographs of exhibits that we've already introduced, I think, and see if you can help us identify them. First picture, do you recognize anything that would be?
I do. Under the bandana is a camera, and that was Shannon's camera.
Camera, okay. That's exhibit 49, it's already been introduced. Exhibit 137.
Those are just the receipts that were in her purse.
And those have been her receipts from Sunspot?
Yes, sir. That's her writing. To 17. And that's I guess her pay sheet.
139, exhibit 140. Exhibit 140.
Underneath Chris's hat, there's one of the shoes that she would wear to work. The Wallabies.
Wallabies.
That's the Wallabies.
Exhibit 141.
That's what she walked down the house with.
I was going to ask you those shoes she had on today.
Yes, sir.
Exhibit 142.
That's a pair of golf club shoes, she had just gotten for Christmas. She'd grown up on the golf course, and she finally decided that she wanted to learn to play, so her daddy got her a pair of golf shoes.
Exhibit 145.
That's one of her pay stubs.
Exhibit 149.
It's my Blockbuster card that she'd keep in her purse.
Exhibit 153.
That's me. She liked to keep that to make fun of me.
Exhibit 155.
It's one of the CDs that she had made.
Exhibit 157.
That's her jewelry. Some hair things that were actually mine, but she usually ended up with my stuff. And then the little note that says, I love you. The letter from Kara. All of that's hers, or mine.
The document in the lower right-hand corner appears to have a burn mark.
Is that one for pay stubs? I can see it right here. Yes, sir, that's pay stub.
Exhibit 158.
Okay. Well, she always kept deodorant in her purse, so I don't know what brand she had at the time, but that's her water bottle, the jewelry, the lotion. That little pink and orange bag was hers. There's her birth control, her socks, her makeup, a card from Salon Visage. It looks like her work keys, maybe.
All those hers?
Yes, sir, but the purse is not.
Okay. Exhibit 156. Kind of just an overall view of some
Yes,
of those
sir.
items.
That's pretty much stuff that would have been in her purse.
Okay. Exhibit 160.
Now, the Have a Good Day was in her car, along with a letter from Kara. And then Buffalo Wild Wings, they went there a lot. So most of that's probably paperwork from her purse.
From the purse or the car?
Her purse, except for the little note was in her car.
Okay. Exhibit 161.
That's from Specialty Select, where she worked at the hospital, my picture again. And then, I know those hats are Chris's, but I don't recognize bikini bottoms at all.
Okay. Exhibit 170.
Those are the jeans she was gonna wear to the party that night.
And were you there when she selected those?
Yes, sir.
Put in the bag,
Yes,
overnight bag,
Those are her big star.
big star jeans?
You have to understand, my daughter was almost 5'9". Very tall, slim, but she had a 36-inch inseam. So I couldn't buy cheap pants because we had to get them long enough. Because even though she was tall, it didn't matter. She was going to wear those heels, so we had to find clothes and pants long. That's one of the T-shirts.
One of her t-shirts. Exhibit 172.
Those are her sweatpants. Those are the pants she wore in the house that day to work.
174.
Those are a pair of her khaki pants that she had in the back of, in one of those bags she was gonna get rid of.
175.
Those were the boxers she slept in. One of her
176.
shirts was in the back of the Forerunner.
Is that one she was gonna give away as well?
Yes, sir. That's one that was too small, she was gonna give away.
178.
That was in the back of the Forerunner.
179.
That was in the back of the Forerunner.
180.
Those are some of her dress pants that were in the back of the Forerunner.
181.
It's hers, it was her.
182.
That was in the back of the Forerunner.
184.
That's just one of the camisoles that she wore. She didn't wear a t-shirt that she didn't wear a camisole under. She was always had one on.
Okay. 185.
That was one of her t-shirts.
188.
Now that is her purse.
And then
And that the silver one is her purse, and then that Wolvera Bradley bag was hers. That Lexus first aid kit was in her car. That was something she had. It looks like her keys, makeup. I can't tell what the receipts are.
either from her purse or the car.
Yes, sir. The UT parking passes were probably in her car,
Okay.
but the Vera Bradley bag was probably in her car in her backpack for school.
191.
Again, there's her birth control. It looks like her card to get into the hospital for work. Some more sunscreen, the picture of her debit card, these cell phones weren't like they are now where you use them for your pictures. So she had several of these cameras that she was going to take to have them developed.
192.
Those are actually, I believe, Chris's boxers that she somehow acquired to sleep in. And that bag was a bag that she had in her car. And she'd gotten that little lint roller for Christmas. The cigarettes are not hers, but pretty much everything else there.
The exhibit was 110.
This is one of the items, if you can see it, right there.
We did like that, it's hard to see, it's dark out dark photo.
I don't know if y'all can see, but there is a green bag where he's circling. It's green and it has stripes. It's got orange and white, maybe some red stripes, and it has brown leather handles. That was the bag that she carried out of the door with her clothes on for the party that night. And that was a bag I kept asking General Fitzgerald and them about where is it, because I knew she had it in the car. And it got left in Kentucky with Vanessa's stuff all in it. And so half of her stuff that was probably there I couldn't find was left there. But that's the bag I tried to find for years.
Exhibit 308.
The bottle of cologne and lotion in the burgundy, that was a gift from Chris that she got for Christmas. And I can't see the name on the pharmacy tag, but that very well could be where she got her birth control. And then the orange bag probably has pencils in it. That looks more like her deodorant there and her keys. And then that's her wallet and makeup.